The blood-red sun dipped below the dusty horizon, casting long shadows across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory as Felicity Blackburn stumbled toward the lone cabin nestled against the foothills. Her torn dress, once a vibrant blue, now hung in tatters around her emaciated frame, the fabric stained with the evidence of her 3-week journey across unforgiving terrain. The year was 1876, and at 22 years old, Felicity had lost everything: her family, her home, and any semblance of hope that had once burned within her heart. The journey from Missouri had stripped her of more than just physical possessions. The Blackburn family farm had been seized after her father's death revealed debts she'd never known existed. Her mother, already weakened by consumption, hadn't survived the shock. With nowhere to go and a younger brother to protect, Felicity had gathered what little remained and set out west, following rumors of land and opportunity. But Thomas, her 16-year-old brother, had succumbed to fever just outside Cheyenne. She'd buried him with nothing but her bare hands and a broken heart. After that, Felicity had wandered aimlessly, surviving on what berries and roots she could forage, trading the last of her mother's jewelry for stale bread that lasted only days. Now, as night approached and temperatures plummeted in the early autumn air, Felicity spotted smoke rising from the cabin's stone chimney. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the thought of warmth pulled her forward despite her caution. Strangers in these parts could be dangerous, especially to a woman alone, but death by exposure seemed the more immediate threat. Preston Quinn noticed the figure approaching long before she reached his property. 6 years on this homestead had taught him vigilance, and the Winchester rifle was never far from reach. Standing 6'2" with shoulders broadened by years of ranch work, Preston kept the weapon nearby as he opened his door to the bedraggled woman who looked more ghost than human. "Please," Felicity whispered, her voice cracking from disuse and thirst. "I don't mean to intrude, I just need." She swayed slightly, unable to complete her sentence as exhaustion threatened to overcome her. Preston holstered his sidearm and reached out to steady her. "Come inside, miss. You look about done in." The warmth of the cabin hit Felicity like a physical force. A modest fire crackled in the stone hearth, illuminating the simple but tidy interior. A wooden table with 2 chairs stood near the cooking area, while a neatly made bed occupied one corner. Shelves lined with provisions and books suggested this man wasn't just surviving, he had created a home. "Sit by the fire," Preston directed, his voice gentle but firm. He guided her to a chair near the hearth, noticing how her body trembled beneath his touch. "When did you last eat?" 2 days, maybe 3, Felicity admitted, her gaze locked on the flames. "I've lost track." Preston moved to his small pantry, returning with a loaf of bread he'd baked that morning. Breaking off a generous piece, he handed it to her without ceremony. "You still belong here," he said simply, his deep voice resonating in the quiet cabin. Felicity looked up, confusion etched across her dirt-streaked face. "I don't understand." Preston gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the vast territory beyond. "In this world, when everything's gone, it's easy to feel like you don't have a place anymore, but you do. Everyone does." Tears welled in Felicity's eyes as she accepted the bread with trembling hands. She ate slowly, forcing herself not to devour it despite her hunger. The simple kindness from this stranger unleashed emotions she'd kept tightly bound during her weeks of solitary survival. "I'm Preston Quinn," he offered, settling into the chair opposite hers and pouring a cup of coffee from the pot kept warm near the fire. He pushed it toward her. "Most folks just call me Quinn." "Felicity Blackburn," she replied after swallowing. "I was heading, well, I don't rightly know where anymore." Preston nodded, not pressing for more information. At 30, he'd seen enough of life to recognize someone running from tragedy. The endless horizons of Wyoming Territory had a way of attracting souls looking to outrun their pasts, himself included. "You're welcome to rest here tonight," he said, standing to retrieve extra blankets from a trunk. "I'll sleep in the barn. Come morning, we can figure what's next." Felicity wanted to protest but lacked the strength. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Just Quinn," he corrected, a hint of a smile softening his weathered features. Mr. Quinn was my father, and he wasn't much deserving of the title. As Felicity finished her modest meal, Quinn prepared a pallet near the fire, adding extra logs to ensure the warmth would last through the night. He moved efficiently around the cabin, gathering necessities before heading to the door. There's water in that pitcher if you're wanting to wash up. I'll bring more in before first light. His hand paused on the doorframe. The door has a sturdy lock, miss. You can use it if it brings you peace of mind. The subtle acknowledgement of her vulnerability touched Felicity deeply. I don't think that will be necessary, Quinn. He nodded once, stepped outside into the gathering darkness, and closed the door behind him. Alone in the warm cabin, Felicity allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in weeks. She used a small amount of water to wash her face and hands, carefully rationing it despite Quinn's assurance of more. Years of farm life had taught her the value of conservation. Sleep claimed her almost immediately upon lying down, her body surrendering to exhaustion despite the unfamiliar surroundings. For the first time since leaving Missouri, Felicity slept without fear of what might find her in the darkness. Dawn broke with golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Felicity woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous evening came rushing back. She sat up, noting fresh water in the pitcher and a bundle of clothing placed carefully on the table. The cabin door opened and Quinn entered carrying firewood. He nodded toward the clothing. They belonged to my sister. She left them last time she visited. Might not fit perfect, but they're clean. Your sister visits you out here? Felicity asked, surprised at the thought of family connections in such a remote location. Twice yearly, regular as clockwork, she and her husband have a place in Laramie. She worries I'll turn wild without civilizing influences. A smile ghosted across his face as he stoked the morning fire. Felicity gathered the clothing, a simple brown skirt, cream-colored blouse, and undergarments, and looked questioningly around the one-room cabin. Understanding her dilemma, Quinn said, I'll tend the horses while you change. Take your time. He stepped outside again, giving her privacy without making a fuss about it. The fresh clothing felt like a miracle against Felicity's skin. Though slightly large, they were whole and clean, unlike the tattered dress she'd worn for weeks. She used more water to wash properly, feeling increasingly human with each passing moment. When Quinn returned, he carried a pail of fresh milk. Breakfast will be ready shortly. Nothing fancy eggs and johnny cake. The chickens have been productive lately. You have quite an operation here, Felicity observed, noticing for the first time the orderliness of the homestead through the window. A corral held several horses, chickens scratched in a fenced yard, and a small garden plot showed signs of recent harvest. Started with nothing but the cabin and 10 acres, Quinn said, cracking eggs into a cast iron skillet. Added a little each year. Now I've got 160 acres, mostly for grazing, run about 40 head of cattle with the help of a ranch hand who comes by when needed. Felicity watched him move confidently around the small cooking area. You've done well for yourself. Done enough, he replied simply. What about you, Miss Blackburn? What brought you to my doorstep looking half dead? The bluntness of his question startled a laugh from her, the first in so long she barely recognized the sound. Everything and nothing, I suppose. As they ate, Felicity found herself telling Quinn her story about her father's death, the discovery of debts, losing the farm, and the desperate journey west with Thomas. When she spoke of burying her brother, her voice faltered, but she continued through her tears, somehow knowing Quinn wouldn't judge her for them. I had a letter from my mother's cousin in Oregon, she concluded, but it was lost when our wagon broke an axle near Cheyenne, after Thomas. I just walked, no direction, no purpose. Quinn listened silently, refilling her coffee cup when it emptied. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. Nearest town is Miller's Creek, about 10 miles west, small place but growing. They've got a general store, blacksmith, even started building a schoolhouse last spring. He paused, considering. Town needs a teacher from what I hear. I'm not qualified to teach, Felicity said, shaking her head. I only had schooling until I was 16. More than most around here, Quinn pointed out. But there's other work. Mrs. Hendricks at the boarding house might need help, or the mercantile. Felicity stared into her coffee cup. I have nothing left, no money, no references. You've got grit, Quinn countered. Walking halfway across the territory alone proves that much. Rest here a few days, get your strength back, then I'll take you to town, make some introductions. Why would you do that for a stranger? Felicity asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Quinn stood, collecting their plates. 6 years ago, I was the stranger, half dead from a bullet wound when old man Miller found me. He didn't ask questions, just patched me up and gave me work until I could stand on my own. He shrugged. Seems only fair to pass that kindness along. Over the next few days, Felicity regained her strength. Quinn insisted she rest, but she refused to remain idle, helping with whatever tasks her recovering body could handle. She gathered eggs, helped in the garden, and proved skilled at mending Quinn's worn shirts when she discovered his haphazard attempts at sewing. On the third evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Quinn asked, "Think you'll be ready to ride to town tomorrow?" A knot formed in Felicity's stomach at the thought of leaving the safety she'd found. "Yes, I suppose so." Quinn seemed to study the flames, his expression unreadable. "There's another option, if you've no objection to hard work and isolation." Felicity waited, sensing he was choosing his words carefully. Winter's coming. I could use help around here tending chickens, preserving the last of the garden, keeping things in order. Come spring, if you wanted to move on to town, that would be your choice. He finally looked at her directly. "It's not charity I'm offering. It's fair work for fair pay plus room and board. People would talk," Felicity said quietly. "A woman living alone with a man she barely knows. People always talk. Question is whether their talk matters more than having a safe place to winter." He added another log to the fire. "I've got my reputation to consider too. I built something here, earned respect from neighbors who were skeptical of a newcomer. I wouldn't risk that lightly." Felicity considered his words. The arrangement made practical sense, yet caution warned her against trusting too easily. "If I stayed, there would need to be boundaries." "Agreed," Quinn said immediately. "I'd move a cot into the storage lean-to for myself. It's weather tight, has its own small stove." "You'd have the cabin proper." The speed of his response reassured her. "And in spring, we reassess. Maybe you'll want to move to town by then. Maybe you'll have decided to head for Oregon after all, or maybe—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. "Maybe I'll want to stay," Felicity completed softly. Quinn nodded once. "Your choice. Always your choice." Decision made, they shook hands formally, the brief contact sending unexpected warmth through Felicity's arm. If Quinn felt it too, he gave no indication. True to his word, Quinn moved his personal belongings to the lean-to structure attached to the cabin's northern wall. Originally built to store supplies and equipment, the space was small but, as he'd said, weather tight. He spent a day installing a small cast iron stove piped into the main chimney, ensuring he'd have warmth through the coming winter. Felicity watched these preparations with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "I've displaced you from your own home." Quinn shook his head as he carried his trunk of clothing to the lean-to. "You've done nothing of the sort. I built this place knowing someday it might need to accommodate more than just me. You planned for a family?" Felicity asked, surprised. A shadow passed over Quinn's face. "Once, maybe. Now I'm just practical about having extra space." He offered no further explanation, and Felicity didn't press. They were still strangers in many ways, despite the arrangement they'd made. As October progressed, they settled into a rhythm. Quinn taught Felicity about the workings of the homestead, how to manage the chicken coop to maximize egg production, the proper feeding schedule for the horses, and the precise amount of kindling needed to maintain the cabin's temperature through cold nights. In turn, Felicity brought order to areas Quinn had neglected. She reorganized the pantry, discovered forgotten preserves from previous seasons, and created a systematic approach to household tasks that saved time and effort. Her presence transformed the functional cabin into something approaching a home. They ate their meals together, usually at the cabin table, though Quinn always returned to his separate quarters afterward. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond daily tasks to personal histories carefully edited on both sides. Felicity suspected. She learned Quinn had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs before homesteading. He mentioned a sister in Laramie but offered little about other family. When Felicity asked about the scar visible above his collar, clearly from a bullet wound, he simply said, "Disagreement with a former associate," and changed the subject. For her part, Felicity shared memories of her life in Missouri, her parents' marriage, and stories about Thomas that made her both laugh and cry. Quinn listened attentively, offering neither judgment nor hollow consolation, just quiet understanding that comforted her more than words could have. By early November, the first serious snowfall blanketed the homestead. Quinn had spent the previous weeks ensuring adequate supplies were stockpiled, firewood stacked higher than the cabin's roof, enough preserved food to last through spring, and medical necessities should illness strike during their isolation. "First big storm typically keeps us snowbound for at least a week," he explained as they watched the heavy flakes from the cabin porch. "Sometimes longer." "We're well prepared," Felicity said confidently, surveying their preparations. Quinn nodded. "Most first-year homesteaders who fail do so because they underestimate winter. Nature's unforgiving out here." The snow continued for 3 days, accumulating nearly 2 feet before the skies cleared. True to Quinn's prediction, they were effectively isolated, the trail to town completely obscured beneath the pristine white expanse. During this enforced confinement, Felicity discovered Quinn was remarkably well-read. A trunk beneath his bed contained dozens of books, classics, poetry, histories, and scientific texts. When she expressed surprise at the collection, he seemed almost embarrassed. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She believed education was the only true path to freedom." A rare, full smile transformed his normally serious face. "She'd be pleased her lessons weren't entirely wasted on me." Those snowbound days established a new dimension to their relationship. Evenings stretched longer, filled with reading aloud by lamplight, Quinn's deep voice bringing stories to life while Felicity worked on mending or knitting. Sometimes they played chess on a beautifully carved set Quinn had traded a calf for 3 winters earlier. "You're quite good," he remarked after she checkmated him for the second consecutive night. "Where did you learn?" "My father taught me," Felicity replied, carefully returning the pieces to their starting positions. "He said chess builds character and foresight." A memory surfaced, making her smile. "Mother said it just gave him an excuse to sit by the fire while she did the evening chores." Quinn laughed, the sound still rare enough to catch Felicity's attention. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Felicity agreed softly. "She would have liked you, I think." The comment hung between them, more intimate than intended. Quinn held her gaze for a long moment before looking away. High praise indeed. As winter deepened, the routine they'd established took on greater significance. Their shared tasks became opportunities for conversation, for learning about each other in ways that transcended mere words. Felicity began to recognize the subtle shifts in Quinn's expression that indicated his mood, the slight furrow between his brows when concerned about the livestock during particularly cold snaps, the almost imperceptible quirk of his lips when amused by something he wouldn't admit to finding funny. For his part, Quinn seemed to anticipate Felicity's needs before she expressed them, bringing extra blankets on the coldest nights or saving the last of the dried apples because he'd noticed they were her favorite. These small considerations went unacknowledged verbally, but the growing warmth between them spoke volumes. In late January, disaster nearly struck. Quinn had ridden out to check fencing along the property's northern boundary, concerned about wolf packs reported in the area. The clear morning gave no hint of trouble, but Wyoming weather was notoriously fickle. By midday, Felicity watched with growing concern as dark clouds gathered rapidly from the west. When the first howling winds hit, driving snow sideways across the yard, her worry became full-blown fear. Quinn had planned to return by noon. It was now well past 2, with visibility reduced to mere feet beyond the cabin door. Pulling on Quinn's spare coat and wrapping a scarf around her face, Felicity ventured as far as the barn, ensuring the animals were secure before returning to maintain a vigilant watch from the cabin. She built the fire higher, heated soup, and positioned a lantern in the window as a beacon. Hours passed with no sign of Quinn. Night fell completely, transforming the blizzard into an impenetrable black wall punctuated only by the ghostly swirl of snow illuminated by her window lamp. Felicity paced, alternating between prayer and practical preparations. She arranged blankets near the fire, heated bricks to place in the bed, and kept water boiling for both tea and potential medical needs. Just after midnight, when she'd begun contemplating the impossible task of organizing a search, a shape materialized from the darkness. Quinn stumbled onto the porch, snow-covered and hunched against the cold, his horse nowhere in sight. Felicity flung open the door, helping him inside. "Thank God," I thought. She stopped, noticing how heavily he leaned on her, how his normally tanned face had taken on a grayish pallor. "Horse spooked at a fallen tree," Quinn managed through chattering teeth. "Threw me, think my ankle's broken, had to walk the last 2 miles. Working quickly, Felicity helped him to the chair nearest the fire. She removed his frozen boots with difficulty, wincing at his poorly concealed grunt of pain when she touched his left ankle. The joint was already swollen to nearly twice its normal size, mottled with angry bruising. "It needs to be set," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My father broke his leg once bringing in the harvest. I helped the doctor." Quinn nodded grimly. "Do what needs doing." Using knowledge gleaned from that long-ago experience, Felicity gathered supplies: clean cloths, whiskey from Quinn's small supply, and 2 straight pieces of wood suitable for splinting. She helped him drink some whiskey first, then used the remainder to clean her hands. "This will hurt," she warned, positioning herself to manipulate the damaged joint. Quinn managed a tight smile. "Already hurts like hell. Proceed, doctor." Despite her warning, Quinn's hoarse shout when she pulled the bones back into alignment pierced Felicity to her core. Tears sprang to her eyes, but she continued working, binding the ankle firmly between the splints and wrapping it securely. "You've done this before," Quinn observed breathlessly when she finished, his face sheened with sweat despite the cold. "Only watched," Felicity admitted, helping him drink water, "but I remembered the steps." She insisted he take her bed rather than attempt the trek to his quarters in the lean-to. Too exhausted and pain-ridden to argue, Quinn allowed her to help him across the room. As she removed his snow-dampened clothing, replacing it with dry night clothes, Felicity maintained a professional demeanor despite the intimacy of the task. Only after Quinn had fallen into an exhausted sleep did Felicity allow her composure to crack. Sitting by the fire, she buried her face in her hands and wept silently from relief, from the aftermath of fear, and from the sudden, overwhelming realization that somewhere during these winter months, Preston Quinn had become essential to her life. Recovery proved frustratingly slow for Quinn, who chafed at his enforced inactivity. Accustomed to constant physical labor, he struggled with the limitations of his injury. Felicity bore his occasional flashes of temper with patience, understanding they stemmed from frustration rather than genuine anger. "You're a better nurse than I deserve," Quinn acknowledged after snapping at her over a particularly painful dressing change. "I'm not used to depending on others." "Clearly," Felicity replied dryly, though her smile softened the word. "Perhaps it's a lesson you needed to learn." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously like something my sister would say." "Then your sister is a wise woman." Felicity finished binding his ankle and stood. "Now, since you insist on being useful despite doctor's orders, you can help me inventory the seed packets for spring planting." This shared task became one of many ways Felicity found to engage Quinn's mind while his body healed. They spent hours discussing improvements to the garden layout, planning expanded chicken coops, and debating the merits of various crops suited to Wyoming's short growing season. During one such planning session in mid-February, As they sat at the table surrounded by crude maps of the property, Quinn suddenly looked up at Felicity with an intensity that caught her off guard. "Would you want to say in these decisions if you stayed beyond spring?" he asked directly. Felicity carefully set down her pencil. "Are you asking if I'm staying? I'm asking if you'd want input into the homestead's future if you did." Quinn's expression remained neutral, but Felicity had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands stilled completely when something mattered deeply to him. "I would," she answered honestly, "but that would depend on what role I played here." The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Quinn held her gaze steadily, something vulnerable flickering behind his usual reserve. "What role would you want, Felicity?" It was the first time he'd used her given name rather than Miss Blackburn, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. Before she could respond, a pounding at the door shattered the moment. They exchanged surprised glances. Visitors were rare even in good weather, unheard of midwinter. Felicity rose to answer, finding a snow-covered young man on their doorstep. "Madam," he said, removing his hat, "I'm James from the McCready place over East Ways. Mrs. McCready's time has come, but something's wrong. Baby won't turn, and there's no getting the doctor from town in this weather." Quinn had managed to stand, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. "Sarah's having trouble," the young man nodded anxiously. "Mr. McCready sent me to ask if your lady might help. Said she'd know what to do, being a woman and all." Felicity felt a momentary panic. She had basic knowledge of childbirth, but had never attended a difficult delivery. "I'm not sure you helped birth Kev's last fall," Quinn interrupted gently. "Remember what you told me about your mother assisting neighborhood women. You know more than you think." His confidence bolstered her courage. "I'll come," Felicity decided, already moving to gather supplies: clean cloths, the small bottle of medicinal whiskey, needle and thread should stitches be needed. Quinn insisted on accompanying her despite his injury. "McCready's place is 3 miles. You can't go alone in this weather, and James here needs to ride ahead and tell them help is coming." Together, they hitched Quinn's strongest horse to the small sleigh used for winter travel. Quinn settled in the driver's position, making room for Felicity beside him. The close quarters were necessary for warmth, but as they set off through the snow, Felicity was acutely aware of his solid presence against her side. The McCready homestead proved to be a well-built cabin similar to Quinn's, though smaller. Inside, Felicity found Sarah McCready, a young woman perhaps 20 years old, in the throes of a difficult labor that had already lasted nearly 20 hours. Drawing on memories of her mother's instructions and her own practical nature, Felicity took charge of the situation. She sent the frantic husband to assist Quinn outside, boiled water for cleanliness, and assessed Sarah's condition with as much confidence as she could project. "The baby's sideways," she determined after careful examination. "We need to turn it before we can proceed." For the next hour, Felicity worked steadily, whispering encouragement to the exhausted mother while manipulating the unborn child into the proper position. When success finally came, Sarah's next contractions produced rapid progress. "I can see the head," Felicity announced, relief flooding her voice. "Just a few more pushes, Sarah. You're doing wonderfully." The baby girl arrived shortly thereafter, her angry cries the most beautiful sound Felicity could imagine. After ensuring both mother and child were cleaned and settled, Felicity stepped outside to deliver the happy news. She found Quinn sitting on the McCready's porch, looking pale from the journey but smiling at the sound of the infant's cries carrying through the door. "A healthy girl," Felicity confirmed, suddenly exhausted now that the emergency had passed. "Mother's resting comfortably." "You're remarkable," Quinn said simply, the admiration in his voice warming her more effectively than any fire could have. They stayed at the McCready place overnight, allowing Sarah and the baby time to stabilize before Felicity would leave them. By morning, news of Felicity's successful intervention had somehow spread to 2 neighboring homesteads, whose occupants trudged through snow to meet Quinn's woman, who had saved Sarah McCready and her baby. Felicity noted with interest that no one questioned her presence at Quinn's homestead or made unseemly insinuations. Whether from respect for Quinn or simple practicality in a land where survival often depended on unconventional arrangements, the neighbors accepted their living situation without judgment. The journey back to their own homestead was made in companionable silence, both too tired for significant conversation. Only as they approached the familiar outline of the cabin did Quinn speak. "You never answered my question from yesterday," he said, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "About what role you'd want here." Felicity took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I'd want a permanent one." Quinn's hands tightened on the reins. "As my housekeeper?" "No." Felicity turned slightly to face him despite the confines of the sleigh. "As your wife, if that's something you might want too." For a moment, Quinn said nothing, and Felicity's heart sank at his silence. Then, carefully controlling the horse with one hand, he reached over with the other to grasp hers tightly. "I've wanted to ask since Christmas," he admitted. "But I feared it was too soon, that you might feel obligated after I took you in." "Is that why you've been so careful to maintain distance?" Felicity asked. "Living in the lean-to even after your injury made it difficult?" Quinn nodded. "I needed you to know your choices were your own. That you could leave come spring with my help and good wishes if that's what you wanted. And if I want to stay, if I want us to build something together here." The smile that transformed Quinn's face was unlike any expression Felicity had seen from him before, open, unguarded, filled with hope. "Then I'd be the most fortunate man in Wyoming Territory." As February gave way to March, Quinn's ankle healed enough for him to resume limited activities around the homestead. The enforced proximity of his recovery period had changed the dynamic between them once he'd acknowledged his feelings for Felicity. Quinn made no attempt to hide his affection, though he maintained proper boundaries pending their formal union. News of their engagement spread quickly through the scattered community. Quinn's reputation for integrity seemed to extend to his romantic choices, as neighbors expressed approval rather than gossip. 3 different homesteading families extended invitations for Felicity to visit once the spring thaw made travel easier. "You've become quite the local celebrity," Quinn teased as they sat by the fire one evening, his ankle propped on a footstool Felicity had fashioned from a crate. First delivering Sarah's baby, now taming the confirmed bachelor of Whispering Creek Valley. "Is that what they call you? The confirmed bachelor?" Felicity smiled, continuing her work on a quilt piece, her first project toward establishing their shared household. "Among other things," Quinn admitted, "most not suitable for your ears. I grew up on a farm, Preston Quinn. I doubt there's much that would shock me." She used his full name deliberately, still savoring the right to such familiarity. The use of his given name drew his attention. Few people called him Preston anymore. Even his sister had adopted the simpler Quinn years ago. From Felicity's lips, it sounded right somehow. "May 1st, he said suddenly. Felicity looked up questioningly. "For our wedding," Quinn clarified, "if you're agreeable." "The circuit preacher comes through Miller's Creek the first Sunday of each month. We could ride in, have the ceremony, perhaps stay overnight at the hotel before returning home." The simple proposal, so practical and yet so perfectly suited to their relationship, brought tears to Felicity's eyes. "Yes," she said simply, "May 1st would be perfect." As the wedding date approached, preparations extended beyond the ceremony itself. Quinn took advantage of improving weather to begin construction on an addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom that would afford them privacy while allowing the main room to function as living and cooking space. "I should have built it years ago," he admitted as they laid out the foundation. "Always meant to expand, just never had sufficient reason before you." Felicity, learning to assist with basic carpentry, handed him a level. "And now I can't imagine the place without it, without you." Quinn checked the alignment carefully. "This land was just a place to exist before. You've made it a home." April brought the final snowmelt and the first tentative green shoots in the garden plot. Quinn rode to town twice, once to file paperwork adding Felicity's name to the homestead deed, and again to purchase supplies for both the wedding and their future together. He returned from the second trip with an unexpected gift, a proper wedding band of simple gold and a blue cotton dress for Felicity to wear at the ceremony. "The general store had it," he explained almost shyly as she held the garment against herself. "Mrs. Peterson helped me guess the size. Said the color would match your eyes." "It's beautiful," Felicity said sincerely, touched by his thoughtfulness. She had worried about appearing proper for the ceremony, having nothing but the everyday clothes they'd cobbled together from Quinn's sister's leftovers and items traded from neighbors. "There's something else," Quinn added, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a folded paper, handing it to her carefully. "Found a fellow in town who specializes in locating people. Gave him what information you had about your mother's cousin in Oregon." Felicity unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It contained an address in Portland, along with a brief note confirming that Alina Whitfield, formerly Alina Carter of Missouri, still resided there with her husband and 3 children. "You found them," Felicity whispered, staring at the connection to her past she'd thought permanently severed. "Thought you might want to write to them," Quinn said. "Let them know you're alive, that you've found a place to belong." Impulsively, Felicity threw her arms around Quinn's neck, embracing him fully for the first time. After a startled moment, his arms encircled her waist, holding her with careful strength. "Thank you," she said against his shoulder, "for everything." Quinn's hand came up to cradle the back of her head gently. "You don't need to thank me, Felicity. Everything I've done has been as much for my benefit as yours." They remained in that embrace longer than propriety might dictate, both reluctant to break the connection that had been building between them through months of shared work, conversation, and growing affection. May 1st dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved their union. They rode to Miller's Creek early, giving Felicity time to prepare at the small hotel while Quinn attended to final arrangements with the preacher. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, witnessed by Quinn's sister Frances and her husband, who had traveled from Laramie for the occasion, along with several neighboring families and townspeople who had come to know Quinn through years of trade. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn's kiss was gentle but held promise of deeper passion, carefully restrained until they were truly alone. The small reception at the hotel dining room featured a cake baked by the proprietor's wife and enough well wishes to make Felicity feel truly welcomed into the community. Frances Quinn Matthews, a practical-looking woman with her brother's direct gaze, embraced Felicity warmly. "I've been trying to find someone to take on Preston for years," she said, low enough that only Felicity could hear. "Never thought he'd manage it himself." "I didn't exactly plan it either," Felicity admitted with a smile. "Life had other ideas," Frances nodded approvingly. "Best marriages often start that way. Especially out here, where circumstances throw people together and reveal their true character faster than fancy courtships ever could." The newlyweds spent their wedding night in the hotel's best room, discovering each other with tenderness and growing passion that bridged their months of careful restraint. If Quinn had harbored any concerns about their compatibility in this most intimate aspect of marriage, Felicity's responsive nature and uninhibited affection quickly dispelled them. "I've never felt so completely myself with anyone," she whispered in the pre-dawn darkness, her head resting on his chest. "As if I've found the other half of myself I never knew was missing." Quinn's fingers traced patterns along her bare shoulder. "I spent years convincing myself I was complete alone," he confessed. "Now I can't imagine returning to that solitude." They rode home the following day, arriving as sunset painted the western sky in brilliant orange and gold. Quinn lifted Felicity from her horse, but instead of setting her down, he carried her across the threshold of their cabin in a gesture that made her laugh with delight. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," he said formally, though his eyes danced with private humor. "Glad to be here, Mr. Quinn," she replied, matching his tone before dissolving into giggles as he pretended to drop her, catching her securely against his chest. That night, as they lay together in the new bedroom Quinn had built, Felicity realized how completely her life had transformed in the months since she'd stumbled, starving and desperate, to this doorstep. From having nothing left to gaining everything she could want: security, purpose, community, and most precious of all, love that had grown naturally from respect and shared experience. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, noticing her contemplative expression in the moonlight filtering through the window. "About that first night," Felicity answered honestly. "When you said I still belonged here, I didn't understand what you meant then." Quinn propped himself on one elbow, looking down at her with the open affection he now freely displayed. "What about now? Now I understand completely." She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, still marveling at her right to touch him so intimately. "You weren't just offering bread or shelter. You were offering the chance to rebuild, to create belonging when I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. You gave me the same gift," Quinn said, turning his head to press a kiss against her palm. "I had a homestead, but not a home, not until you." Summer brought abundant growth to both the land and their partnership. The garden flourished under Felicity's careful tending, providing fresh vegetables that supplemented their meals and promised plenty for preserving. Quinn's cattle herd increased with a successful calving season, and his reputation for fair dealing brought offers of partnership from larger ranching operations to the south. In late August, as they harvested the season's bounty, Felicity shared news of her own, the first flutterings of new life growing within her, expected to arrive by early spring. Quinn's reaction combined shock, joy, and fierce protectiveness that made Felicity laugh even as tears of happiness filled her eyes. "You'll need to rest more," he insisted, immediately trying to take the basket of beans she was carrying. Felicity held it firmly, shaking her head. "I'm with child, not invalid. Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," Quinn argued, then softened at her determined expression. "At least promise you'll tell me when tasks become too strenuous." "I promise," Felicity agreed, understanding his concern came from love rather than doubt in her capabilities. That evening, sitting on the porch they'd built together during the summer months, Quinn placed his hand gently over Felicity's still flat abdomen. "I never expected this," he admitted quietly, "a family of my own, after everything that happened before I came west." Felicity covered his hand with hers. Quinn rarely spoke of his past before Wyoming, but occasional references suggested experiences that had marked him deeply. She'd never pressed, understanding some memories were best approached gradually, if at all. "You deserve happiness, Preston," she said simply. "We both do," he nodded slowly, his expression solemn. "I want to tell you about why I left Pennsylvania. You should know the whole truth about the man you've married, especially now." His hand remained protectively over their unborn child. For the next hour, Quinn spoke more continuously than Felicity had ever heard, revealing the complicated history he'd kept private. The son of a schoolteacher mother and abusive father, he joined the Union Army at 18, serving until the war's end before returning to find his mother deceased, and the family home sold for debts. Working first as a lawman in a small mining town, Quinn had discovered corruption that reached to the highest levels of local government. "I testified against men who'd been considered pillars of the community," he explained. "Men who'd arranged accidents for miners who complained about dangerous conditions, who'd stolen from widows' pension funds, who'd rigged elections to maintain their power." His testimony had secured convictions, but made him a marked man. The bullet scar Felicity had noticed came from an ambush that killed his partner. After recovering, Quinn had headed west, changing his name slightly from Preston Quinlan to Preston Quinn and starting fresh in Wyoming Territory. "Old Man Miller saved my life when I arrived half dead," Quinn concluded. "Taught me ranching, helped me file homestead papers, kept my confidence when newcomers arrived asking questions. I've lived honestly since coming here, but my arrival was built on necessary deception." Felicity listened without interruption, understanding finally why Quinn maintained vigilant habits despite years of peaceful existence. When he finished, she took his hand firmly in hers. You did what was necessary to survive and to see justice done, she said. I'm proud to be your wife, Preston Quinn or Preston Quinlan or whatever name you choose. The relief in Quinn's eyes spoke volumes. Just Quinn suits me fine. The man I was in Pennsylvania died on that mountain trail. The man I became here, the man who found you, that's who I want to be for the rest of our days. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in red and gold, Felicity's pregnancy became more visible. Her letter to her mother's cousin in Oregon had produced a warm response, with Alina Whitfield expressing delight at discovering Felicity's survival and extending an open invitation to visit. Quinn promised they would make the journey someday when the baby was old enough to travel comfortably. Their first Christmas as a married couple was celebrated with simple but meaningful gestures. Quinn surprised Felicity with a rocking chair he'd commissioned from the carpenter in town, perfect for nursing the coming baby. Felicity presented Quinn with a hand-knitted sweater and a leather-bound journal she'd noticed him admiring in the general store catalog. For recording our family's history, she explained as he ran his fingers over the embossed cover. So our children will know their story from the beginning. Quinn's voice caught as he replied, "A better story than I ever thought I'd have to tell." Winter arrived with heavy snow but found them well prepared. The expanded cabin provided comfortable space for their growing family, and the lean-to Quinn had once occupied now stored additional supplies and equipment. Neighboring families visited more frequently than the previous year, drawn by Felicity's welcoming nature and Quinn's gradually increasing openness. Sarah McCready came specifically to check on Felicity's pregnancy, bringing her healthy daughter named Felicity in honor of the woman who'd ensured her safe delivery, and offering practical advice from one mother to a future one. Her husband traded Quinn a hand-carved wooden cradle for help with spring planting, creating another tangible reminder of the community they'd become part of. February storms kept them homebound for nearly 2 weeks, time they used to prepare the small alcove off their bedroom that would serve as the baby's space. Quinn insisted on lining the walls with extra insulation, while Felicity sewed soft blankets and tiny garments. "You're nesting," Quinn observed with amusement as Felicity rearranged the baby's area for the 3rd time in a week. "Is that so unusual?" she asked, looking up from folding miniature shirts. "Not at all." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with obvious affection. "Just never expected to find it so endearing." Felicity's labor began during a rare clear day in early March. Quinn, having anticipated this moment with equal parts excitement and terror, maintained remarkable composure as he helped her through the increasingly intense contractions. When it became clear the birth was progressing rapidly, he sent their ranch hand galloping toward town for the doctor, though both knew the baby would likely arrive before help could return. "Remember what you told Sarah McCready," Quinn encouraged as Felicity paced the bedroom between contractions. "You know what needs to happen." Felicity nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. "This baby is coming whether we're ready or not." 6 hours after the first pains began, Felicity delivered a healthy son with Quinn's steady assistance. His hands, so capable with horses and carpentry, proved equally adept at guiding his child into the world and tying off the umbilical cord per Felicity's gasped instructions. When the doctor finally arrived near midnight, he found the new family peacefully settled, mother resting comfortably, father cradling his swaddled son with an expression of wonder, and the infant nursing contentedly. "Looks like you managed just fine without me," the doctor commented after examining both mother and child. "Strong boy you've got there." "Thomas Preston Quinn," Felicity said softly, honoring both her lost brother and her husband in their son's name. Quinn looked up from his contemplation of the baby's tiny features. "Are you certain about the Preston part? We could choose something different." "I'm certain," Felicity replied firmly. "I want him to carry your name, to know he comes from a man of integrity and courage." The doctor discreetly busied himself with packing his bag, giving the couple privacy for this intimate moment. He'll carry your strength too, Quinn said, carefully transferring the baby back to Felicity's arms. Your compassion and determination. Looking down at their son's peaceful face, Felicity felt the completion of a circle that had begun that desperate evening when she'd arrived at Quinn's doorstep with nothing left. From that moment of utter loss to this pinnacle of fullness, the journey seemed both impossible and inevitable. "Thank you," she whispered, uncertain whether she was addressing Quinn, fate, or some higher power that had guided her steps to this place and this man. Quinn sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm encircling Felicity's shoulders as they both gazed at their child. "For what?" "For the bread," she said simply. "For telling me I belonged when I believed I had nothing left to give or receive, for making it true." Understanding dawned in Quinn's eyes as he recognized the reference to their first meeting. He pressed a kiss to her temple, then one to his son's forehead. "You always belonged, Felicity. I just had the good fortune to be the one who found you." As spring returned to Wyoming Territory, the Quinn homestead flourished with new life and purpose. Thomas grew stronger daily, his lusty cries and bright eyes evidence of his healthy development. Quinn completed the bedroom addition he'd begun the previous year, creating a proper nursery adjacent to their room. Felicity recovered quickly from childbirth, resuming modified duties around the homestead while adapting to motherhood. The skills that had served her through hardship proved equally valuable in this new chapter: practical problem solving, resilience, and the ability to find joy in simple moments. On May 1st, their first wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Felicity by inviting neighbors for a small celebration. The McCreadys, the Petersons from town, and 3 other homesteading families gathered to share food, music, and community spirit. As the afternoon sun cast golden light across the expanded homestead, Quinn raised a toast to his wife. "1 year ago, I gained more than a partner," he said, his deep voice carrying across the assembled group. "I gained a future I never thought possible." He turned to Felicity, who stood cradling Thomas against her shoulder. "You came with nothing, yet gave me everything." Felicity smiled through tears that gathered but didn't fall. The contrast between her arrival starving, desperate, alone, and this moment of abundance struck her forcefully. The cabin that had seemed a miracle of shelter now anchored a growing ranch. The stranger who'd offered bread had become her husband, father to her child, and partner in building a life neither could have imagined separately. As their guests departed near sunset, Quinn joined Felicity on the porch where she sat nursing Thomas in the rocking chair he'd given her at Christmas. "Happy?" he asked simply, resting his hand on her shoulder. Felicity leaned her head against his side, looking out over the homestead that had become truly theirs, the expanded garden already showing green shoots, the new barn housing increased livestock, the fenced pasture where additional cattle grazed. Beyond these physical improvements lay less tangible but more significant changes: the connections they'd formed with neighbors, the respect Quinn had gained as a fair businessman and rancher, the plans they'd begun for the community schoolhouse where Felicity might teach once Thomas was older. "More than happy," she answered, shifting the baby slightly to look up at her husband. "Complete," Quinn nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. From separate journeys marked by loss and reinvention, they had created a shared path forward, one built on mutual respect that blossomed into love, on practical partnership that deepened into unshakable commitment. As twilight gathered around their homestead, Quinn took his sleeping son gently from Felicity's arms, extending his other hand to help her rise from the rocking chair. Together they stepped into the warm light of the home they'd built, closing the door on darkness while holding fast to each other, and the future they would continue creating together one day, one challenge, one joy at a time. From the moment Felicity had sat by his fire with nothing left and Quinn had offered both bread and belonging, their story had been one of restoration, of finding wholeness where once there had been only fragments, of building strength from shared vulnerability, of creating family from 2 souls who had believed themselves destined for solitude. In the vast, unforgiving landscape of Wyoming Territory, where so many dreams withered against harsh realities. Theirs had taken root and flourished proof that even in the wildest places, love could transform survival into truly living.